This particular lesson I'm calling The Trap of Fools, because we're going to deal with some of the things that David had to go through that helped to make him and his men into mighty men. As I said, it's not going to be easy. There's going to be tests that are involved that are very difficult, and I'm going to pull 3 of those tests out of these 4 chapters here from 1 Samuel, the 23rd chapter through the 26th chapter. It's some of the most difficult times in David's life, and he's, at least up to this point, he's never faced these kind of trials before. The trap of fools is a good statement. A life of faith is a life of risk. That's a true statement. You cannot live by faith without taking risk. It's a part of it. You don't know, you have a promise from God. This is the way God works. God gives us a command and a promise. He doesn't tell us how it's going to work out, how he's going to do all that. In other words, he gives us no explanations. God will never explain himself. He'll give you a command. Let me give you an illustration. Abraham, go, leave your family, go to a land that I will show you. And I'm going to bless you and make of you a great nation. A command and a promise. That's the way God works, because that requires faith. Now, there's some people that object to that, but God's wiser than we are. The truth is, faith makes us all equal. It puts us all in equal standing. If it was on intelligence, some of us have higher IQs than others. If it was on natural beauty, some of us are more beautiful than others. If it was you put it on any other scale, it would not be equal. But when it comes to faith, everybody is on their own. You either choose to believe God or you choose not to believe God. I'm so glad that I started learning these principles as just a boy, and I began living what we call a life of faith. And I look back on those days, and they're very precious to me now, because that's where I learned the principle of trusting God. I cannot tell you how many times I have started out as a young evangelist on an evangelistic trip. I'm going to preach at a certain place. I have only got enough money to get me there, enough gasoline to get there. I don't know how I'm going to get home. I don't know what's going to happen, but I learned how to trust God. A life of faith is a life of risk. Here's another statement that I like. It is criminal to live too cautiously. That's one of the translations out of the Messenger Bible where he's talking about faith, and this is the way he translates it. But I love that statement. It's criminal to live too cautiously. Some people are always, they got to be sure they got everything lined up. They got to be sure. No, where's the faith that is involved in it? Anytime that you're going to do something that pleases God requires faith. Let me quote from Hebrews, the 11th chapter, and verse 6, where he says, "But without faith it is impossible to please God." Why? Because faith shows that we trust him. Faith shows that we love him enough, we're willing to take the risk. And if you're not willing to do that, it's because you don't love him enough, your heart's not big enough, you don't trust him enough. So I love those statements. It's criminal to live too cautiously. Let me talk about the first trap here. This comes from 1 Samuel 23, the trap of betrayal. Boy, that's a hard one. It's a hard one. I've mentioned it before, but it was worth repeating. Jesus had his Judas. You will too. Sooner or later, somebody's going to betray you. And that's what happens in David's life. The story is, there's a small town in the tribe of Judah by the name of Keilah, and it's harvest time, and the Philistines invade and are robbing their harvest. David hears about it, and wisely, he prays about it. I would encourage you to do that. Never go into battle if you haven't prayed first. Know what God is saying. David says, should I go and fight against them? God said, go up and fight against them. David's men objected and said, wait a minute. We can't even deal with Saul. And you're wanting us to take on the Philistines too? So David goes back and prays again. Again, that's not bad. It's not bad. Sometimes that's the best thing we can do. Go pray again. He prays again and God said, yes, go fight and I'll give you the victory. But when he goes down and defeats the Philistines, saves the men of Keilah, the men of Keilah now are ready to betray David to King Saul. Saul learns that he's entered into a town, and listen to the way the Bible says it. It says of Saul, Saul said, God has delivered my enemy into my hand. Oh my, people really get some mixed up, crazy ideas about God. God hadn't done any such thing, but that's the way that Saul is looking at it. Because he said, now he's inside a city with walls and gates. I've got him trapped. I'll surround him and destroy him. Again, David prays about it and he says, what should I do? Will they deliver me into Saul's hand? And God said, yes, they will deliver you. Now, listen to me and listen carefully, because this is a very difficult one. There's not a lot of verses that are given to this story, but nothing hurts any worse than risking your life for somebody and then them turning around and betraying you. It will happen. It happens in every person's life. Sooner or later, someone that you trusted, someone that you helped, someone, as I said, David risked his life to fight for these men, and now they turn around and betray him. Will they deliver me up to the hand of Saul? And the Lord answered and said, yes, they will deliver you up. So what do you do? I mean, you've got some choices to make. Do you just wipe out the city of Keilah and say, you bunch of ingratitudes? I mean, you don't care about anybody but yourself. David doesn't do that. He just chose to walk away. And the way the Bible said it, David and his men left to go wherever they could go. They didn't know where they were going now. They didn't know. They'd come there to help them, to save them, and they did. And God helped them to do it. But now they have to just turn and walk away. Boy, that is always a scary position to be in. I've been in that position 2 or 3 times, and oh my, it hurts terribly. But that's when you learn whether you're really trusting God, if you're willing to just give it all into God's hands and say, I'm not going to defend myself. I'm not going to fight. I'm just going to walk away because I am trusting the Lord. Here's the second test that they had. The second test is what's called the test of slander. The test of slander. This happens in chapter 25. In chapter 25, there is a group of people in the place called Carmel. That there was a very wealthy man there by the name of Nabal, and it's interesting, Nabal's name literally meant the fool. He sure lived up to his name. Nabal was a herdsman. He owned a lot of sheep, and so when the harvest time comes for sheep, of course, it's when they're shearing the wool from the sheep, and it's a big celebration time. It's a harvest festival. So David's men have been protecting all these shepherds of Nabal. They're acting like a security force. They're guarding and protecting, make sure nobody steals anything, hurts anything. So when David finds out that Nabal is shearing his sheep, he sends some of his men over to the celebration and wants to know if they can join in the festival celebration. And Nabal acted like Nabal. As I said, his name meant the fool, and he sure acted the fool. He just begins to berate them, falsely accuse them. He accuses David of rebelling against Saul, of them being troublemakers, and it wasn't a pretty picture at all. So in the midst of this celebration, Nabal is exploding like a volcano and just accusing them of all kinds of terrible things. Now listen carefully. Many times people like Nabal accuse you of the things they are guilty. It was Nabal, for instance, that was the rebel, not David. David wasn't the one that was doing evil. Nabal is the one that had the rebellion in his heart. So he's accusing David of his own sin. And as he attacks David's men, it didn't go well with David. They come back to David and they tell David what is happening, that he's accused you of being disloyal to King Saul. And David became very angry about it. Now again, I caution you, beware of where your emotional focus is in life. If you focus on people that do you wrong, guess what? You become like the people you don't like. That's a mistake. That's why we should always focus on Christ. Focus on Jesus. I can remember as a young Christian, and I became a Christian when I was just a boy and started preaching when I was 11, and I was involved in youth activity all during my teen years and such, and became a youth pastor. But I can remember those late teen years. I got very discouraged because I started watching other Christians. And I can remember telling my mother one day, Mom, if I didn't know Jesus personally for myself, I would be tempted to become an atheist from watching the way other Christians live. That's a mistake. Don't get your eyes on people. People will disappoint you. Sometimes people do things that are just absolutely wrong. So don't get your eyes on people. That's what's happening here with this story. Nabal is angry. Now David is angry. And David is saying, I'm going to go and kill every man on his farm. Every man, every male that is alive. He commands his men, put your swords on. They knew what that meant. We're going to battle. We're going to fight against these people that have slandered our leader. He's planning to defend his name with violence. That's always wrong. That's always wrong. Jesus said, pray for those that despitefully use you. Jesus said, do good to those that abuse you. That's the Christian way. That's the right way to disarm them. But David is going to defend himself. The problem of defending yourself is when you defend yourself, God cannot defend you. I would rather have God defending me than anyone else. David is now taking vengeance into his own hands. That's playing God, because vengeance belongs to God. It doesn't belong to us. David is now ready to go and to kill every male that is there in this family of Nabal and all of his servants, all of those that are associated with him. He is going to defend his name. It's here that we're introduced to a very interesting person, a lady by the name of Abigail, Nabal's wife. Boy, there's some things that's hard to figure out in life, isn't there? Here's this beautiful woman married to a fool. I mean, this wise lady. I have no idea how they got married, but she is his wife. When she hears about what her husband has done, she knows they are in trouble. This man, my husband, has slandered this chieftain. There's no telling what is going to happen. And the servants were frightened. They're scared. They said, you know, this is them. They're talking behind Nabal's back, but they said, you know what a fool he is. Nabal is his name, and he is a fool. And that's literally what they're saying about him. And so she gathers up a large amount of fruit, cakes, all kinds of delicacies from the party, loads them on the animals. She doesn't tell Nabal what she's doing. Oh boy, there's a lot of discussion about, did she do what was right? Or if she hadn't have done it, By morning, all her baby boys would be dead. Nabal would be dead if she hadn't have done it. Did she do right? Was she usurping her husband's authority? She knew her husband, that she couldn't talk to him. In fact, the Bible said when she returned, she didn't even tell him what she had done until the next day when he sobered up. It's quite obvious this woman has lived with this man some time, and she knew when he's drunk, it's not a good time to be trying to explain things to him. So the next morning, after he sobers up, she tells him the story. She goes to meet David, carrying all this royal feast. She's a very pleasant person, obviously a beautiful lady, but a wise lady. She takes a gift to David's men, and when she meets him, the words that she uses, they're classic. As she approaches him, she begins, first of all, talking about his God-given purpose. You are the one that God has chosen to become the next king of Israel. She's reminding him of God and God's purpose for his life. She says to him, if you take this vengeance upon yourself and you kill Nabal, which he deserved, if you do this, then one day you're going to be king and you're going to have a guilty conscience. Because you're going to remember how you defended yourself. Now listen to me carefully. This is one of the things of the trap of slander. People do you wrong. They talk bad about you. They say evil about you. They tell lies about you. What do? Do what Jesus did. The Bible said of Jesus, he did not open his mouth, but he committed himself into the hands of him that judges righteously. Too many times we try to defend ourselves. We'll start arguing, quarreling, trying to prove that we are innocent, trying to prove we didn't do anything wrong, and all it does, it just causes the argument to go to a higher level. All it does, everybody gets a little more angry, and the polarization takes place, and people are forced to take sides. Don't do that. It's a mistake. And what Abigail said to David was so true. God is going to do what he said. And one day you're going to be king just like God said you're going to be king. And when you become king, you don't want this guilt of having murdered a man's family to defend yourself. Wise words. Thank God David was sensible enough that he listened to her. And he told all his men, turn around, we're going back. We're not going to go kill Nabal or any of his household. Those are wise words, wise words. It shows how much you really trust God if you're willing to leave those things in God's hands. Her appeal to him, let me mention just a word about it. She asked David to remember her when God fulfilled his destiny. She didn't know what was going to happen. David did not know what was going to happen. But when she got back home, the next day, after the wine had gone out of her husband and he sobered up, she tells him what happened. And the Bible said, the Lord smote Nabal. He had what we would probably call a stroke. 10 days later, he dies from that. Never recovered from it. Nobody knew that. Nobody understood that. See, we don't know what the future holds. The person that may be giving you the most grief in your life may be dead by next week. You don't know. We don't know. And Abigail did not know. But when she said to David, when God fulfills your destiny, remember your handmaiden or your servant, that I came and I served you. Please remember me. David did. What David did, he sent his men and invited her to come and to marry him, to become his bride. She became the second wife of David. First wife had been taken away. Michal was his first wife, and Saul had already taken her away and given her to another man. And so this is the second wife that David has, that he has married. My, what an ending to the story. You talk about things that turn so quickly. It's well said. The doors of destiny turn on small hinges. Little things that, when she told Nabal what had happened, he has a stroke. 10 days later, he's dead. Then David invites her to come to become his bride. What a tremendous story. I'm thankful for Abigail, that what she did turned this whole thing around. Let me talk about a third one. The third one I'm going to call the trap of vengeance, and it goes back to chapter 24. It also jumps on up to chapter 26. The trap of vengeance. This is dealing with King Saul. The problem with Saul was very difficult for David because he was his king. He was his ruler. He was his leader. And yet Saul was the one that was creating such havoc, such pain, such grief in David's life. The story is told in chapter 24, and then it continues in chapter 26, about two incidents where David and Saul came together, and Saul was asleep, did not know it. The first time is the story where David and his men are hiding in this large cave, and Saul doesn't know he's there. Josephus, the Jewish historian, says a spider had built its web across the mouth of the cave. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. That's what Jewish history says. It could be true. Whatever it was, there was something that caused King Saul to let down his guard. He's looking for David. He doesn't know where David and his men are. He's got an army, thousands of men that are following with him, and they're looking for David and to try to kill him. They have no idea he's in that cave. The heat of the day, the sun's bearing down, and so Saul says, I want to go in and rest for a while. So he goes into the cave to take a nap, to rest, to refresh himself, not knowing that David and his men are hiding in the cave. When Saul went to sleep, David's men come and start whispering to him. This is the day that God told you he would deliver your enemy into your hand, and you could do whatever you wanted to with him. Now, my question is, where did God say that? It's not in your Bible. It's not there. Now, possibly there was something that was repeated among them like that as a tradition, but it's not recorded in the Bible. There is no such statement. So this is their interpretation of God's message to David. I'm going to deliver your enemy into your hand, and you can do whatever you please with him. David did not buy that. David did not accept that. He didn't accept their interpretation. The way that you interpret something is just as important as what was said, because you can take whatever God said and twist it. And I think that's exactly what they were doing. They wanted to kill Saul, and so they're saying, God wants you to kill Saul. And so they're justifying themselves. David says, no, I am not going to touch King Saul. Again, I point out, David wasn't afraid of Saul. That was not the problem. David was afraid of God. He respected God, and he's saying, I'm not going to touch the Lord's anointed. God's the one that made him king. It's not my place to take him out. That's God's responsibility. David was right. He's absolutely right. He understood authority. He understood, because God was the one that chose Saul to be the king, it's God's responsibility to remove him, not David's. See, when we begin to take that responsibility on ourselves, as I said, we're playing God. It's a trap of vengeance, and the Bible is clear about it. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Vengeance doesn't belong to us. It belongs to God. So David said, no, I will not kill him. But David did something, though. He took his knife and he cut off the corner of Saul's robe. Now that shows Saul is asleep. He doesn't know what's going on. He cut off the corner of Saul's robe. And the Bible said after he had done it and cut off the corner of his robe, his heart smote him. I have touched the Lord's anointed. In other words, what he had done, he had disgraced his master. By cutting off the corner of his robe, he had shown dishonor to him. Now listen to me carefully, because many of us are not willing to kill them, but we will talk about them. We're not willing to murder them, but we will dishonor them by the words that we say. Be careful, be careful. David's heart smote him. I find that very interesting, that David does not allow his heart to become hardened like the heart of King Saul. Saul is trying to kill him. And David just cuts off the corner of his robe and his heart smites him. Keep a tender heart toward God. No matter what people say about you, keep a tender heart. No matter how people treat you, keep a tender heart. Keep your conscience pure. The Bible speaks of Jesus, and it said, we have a high priest who is easily touched with the feelings of our weaknesses. I want to be that kind of preacher, that kind of a minister. I see a lot of preachers, I tell you, some preachers, they got this entourage around them. They've got all their security force. They've got, there's 4 guards and 6 police dogs, and you can't get close to them. That's not like Jesus. Jesus is easy to touch. I want to be that kind of person, that people can talk to them, that people can get close to them. That's the way Jesus is. David kept a tender heart toward the man that is trying to murder him. That's amazing. Amazing. Only God can help you do that. And so the next time that David come into a situation with King Saul, and that is in chapter 26. In that case, Saul is asleep, and David says, I'm not going to touch him again. I'm not going to cut off the corner of his robe. Every time you use the knife to cut off a corner, you're cutting your own conscience. You're hardening your own conscience. David said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to become like King Saul. He doesn't try to excuse himself, his own bad behavior because of, look what Saul did. I'm not as bad as Saul. That's not who we're compared ourselves with. We should compare ourselves with Christ. He's our standard. He's the one that we should be wanting to live like. And so David never again fell into this trap. The next time, he simply picked up the water bottle, which was by King Saul's head. He picked up his spear, his spear and staff, and he carries them up on top of the mountain. Then he awakens the army and says, come and get this. And what he's doing, he's proving I was there. I could have killed you, but I'm not going to kill you. I'm not going to touch you. In fact, those words in chapter 26 are some of the saddest words in Saul's life. Saul says to David, I have played the fool and erred exceedingly. Because he knew that David could have killed him. Just one blow, he would have been dead. But David refused to do it because he's overcoming the trap of vengeance. Don't take it into your own hands. Don't become like the people that you don't like. Rather, learn to deal with these difficult people in life. I use a picture there because I think it's classic for this. Difficult people. There's some people that make a lot of noise, show a lot of teeth, and they would hurt you if they could hurt you. But Saul can't hurt David. Saul can't touch him because God is with David. God is the one that is leading his life. So if we're going to be leaders, we're going to have to learn how to deal with disgruntled people, unhappy people, people that don't cooperate. You've got to learn how to take them and put them together into a team. Don't allow them to take control of your life, like the trap of slander, like the trap of vengeance. Don't allow that to happen. David was able to overcome because of his relationship with God. And I assure you, whatever your situation may be, you'll sooner or later, you're going to have to deal with some difficult people. It's one of the things where Jesus said, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I'm going to make you ruler over many. So suddenly, you are dealing with bigger problems. Like one sister said, little church, little devil. Big church, big devil. There's some truth in that because you're dealing with people. You're dealing with disgruntled, unhappy people. But you can do it right and overcome these traps in life. They don't have to destroy you. David is a good example of that. He ultimately overcomes. And we're going to see how that God used this to develop him to become the greatest king that Israel ever had. He became like what we call the watermark, the standard. Everybody is measured by him. Later on they would say of the kings, but he was not like his father David, or he was like David, his father. And he becomes the standard that everything is set by because he overcomes the traps in life. Jesus had to deal with it. We will too. Every one of us has to deal with it. You can't avoid it. But if you'll keep the right spirit, keep the right attitude, or as David does here, he keeps a tender heart toward God. And I think the way that we do that is deal with the little things. Don't allow little things to become big things. If they become big things, it affects us, and we get a hard heart. We get a very hardened conscience. No, deal with the little things, and if you'll deal with those things, you'll never get into the point where that you're doing some of the evil things. I have been shocked, just shocked, that some of the things that ministers can do, that the things that I was talking to my friend Steve just last night and discussing some of the things that I've seen over the years, and it's shocking that they can behave just like somebody that never even knew God, someone that was an infidel or an atheist that never had any relationship with God, and yet they play the same kind of games, they do the same kind of things. How did they get there? One step at a time. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually in their lives. But if we choose like David, keep a tender heart, keep a pure conscience. That should be, the Apostle Paul said, I have endeavored to keep a pure conscience toward God and men. That should be one of our goals in life. If you keep that, and you keep that sincerity and purity, then no matter what the difficulties may be in life, you will be able to overcome them. So I learned this from David, that he overcomes. He overcomes. And sadly, we will learn that he becomes discouraged, and in his discouragement, he fails. But when he's dealing with the test in life, and you never know when they're going to come, he overcame those tests and to become one of the great kings of Israel. I pray that what we're learning here of David's life is something you can apply to your own personal life that will help you to be everything that God created you to be.